So we begin by checking with the five senses, is what you said
Yeah.
first.
So first of all, do you have a belief in mind that's
Oh,
good? It feels
okay,
like
good.
I know this thing.
Boy, hang on a minute. That's going to be tricky. Um,
It doesn't have to be a big political belief either. It could be what the day of the week is, or it could be your name, where you were born.
well, I was going to say I dissolved stuff like that a long time ago. The day of the week and all of that kind of stuff are just useful fictions.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Um, and this does relate to um, things that are going on in the world, but um, the belief um, that we don't harm others.
Mm. That we shouldn't harm others. You
Yes, that we
know,
shouldn't harm others. Yes.
good. So how now again, hold that idea. We shouldn't harm others. So there's a moral belief here.
Hmm.
You might have some sort of emotional component of that. Does that show up in the body someplace?
Let's see. Hang on. Yeah. Yeah. This little area right here.
And what kind of emotional, if we were going to put a label on the emotional sense of it, what would that have?
Whew. Um, I, it's not really an emotion, but there's a sense of wishing for and needing for.
Hmm. Where is that coming out of, though? We're kind of going a slightly different direction, but I think this is a fruitful way of digging into this too.
Okay. Where
What?
is this coming from?
Yeah. Th this longing for what would happen if we didn't do that? If we didn't abide by the moral standard of not harming others?
If we did not,
Yeah.
well, I mean, I think things would be even more barbaric than
So,
they are.
yeah, and don't go to the mind. I'm talking more to the
Okay.
emotions right now. So,
Oh, okay. All
so
right.
you have like an emotional sensation of like wanting this to be the case, right?
Okay.
Why describe that a little bit more for me if you can.
Describe.
Yeah, the emotion that comes up with the idea that, we should be not harming other people.
Hang on. I guess the sadness and fear.
Mm,
I mean, that's really hard to pinpoint. I mean, it's very subtle. It's very well hidden behind just that sensation that's showing up kind of in this part of the body.
mm.
But that's what seems to be there.
So there's a feeling of sadness and fear if we don't
Mhm.
care for other people or not cause suffering to other people.
Right.
So we can say in a way that the feeling of wanting everybody to, you know, abide by ahimsa or not harm others is coming from this feeling of trying to avoid sadness and fear,
Right.
right? There's a it's nice. We can have like a nice moral framing on it and that, we say it's just good to not hurt other people. But if we don't, it brings up in us a sense of discomfort. When we see other
Mhm.
people being harmed, it brings up a sense of discomfort. When we feel like we are being harmed by somebody, it brings up this sense of discomfort. So, can you feel that fear and that sadness and feel that even if it's, as mild as it is, just feel that and feel that that is okay to be here, that it's it's something which has been there for a very long time and probably ties back in with what we were talking about earlier regarding
Mhm.
that feeling of being vulnerable and powerless and, you know,
Sorry, something just kind of
yep,
popped up that
yep,
had never occurred to me before.
yeah, what's that?
Um, Getting spanked when I was really young, when I
Hmm.
was like 4 and 5.
Yep,
Um, Talk about feeling helpless. Talk
yeah,
about feeling
sure.
powerless. You
Yeah,
know, I mean, yeah, that I think that's really where it all begins.
yeah. And
Uh,
it might even have started before that. I mean, it's um marginally useful up to a point to kind of have like a, okay, well, I think it might be from that. Oh, I think it might be from that. We can maybe help us put things into a cognitive perspective, but as far as really letting go of them and working through them, it's more helpful to just be in the body with them. And,
okay,
because it might have, like, that point might have happened at some, when you were 4 or 5, but that might have been, number 27 on the list of things that have triggered this, that you just, some of the others might have been pre-verbal. Some of them were completely forgotten. For whatever reason, they didn't make the grade in being, you know, cataloged for all time to remember this one particular incident.
okay,
So it doesn't necessarily matter that, we had a big important part there. You can use that as a moment of reparenting, inquiry, though. I mean, going back to that time is
right,
helpful. So it's kind of useful in that way, but what we really want to do is to feel the sensation now, that feeling of helplessness, that powerlessness, that sadness, that fear. You can feel that, and again, you can feel sort of the boundaries of that and have space. You can feel all of the space around those sensations, so that we're reminding ourselves now that this is not cause for concern now. This is just a small bundle of sensation happening in a much, much larger space. And when we first experienced it, either at 4 or 5 or sometime much before, when we just don't have access to those memories, it would have felt huge. It would have felt like there was absolutely no boundary around that. Like everything was that fear, that that powerlessness, that discomfort, the sadness, the scaredness, all of that. That was absolutely the totality of the experience. But now we have this wonderful capacity to detach from those and to feel all of this surrounding spaciousness around it. And it completely shifts the perspective of what it means to have those kind of experiences. So we want to become aware of that, though, more and more, so that we're not living out of that same state of all encompassing, the emotion is the totality of the experience, like we used to when we were little. Um, so this was a bit of a diversion from where we had come into this little bit of inquiry from, but I think it's also relevant to take any of these little sidetracks that are there and see if that can lead us to another moment of that opening and that spaciousness, so that we can see that even the belief that you have about we shouldn't harm other people, it's based off of this conditioned experience that if we don't harm other people, I am going to feel like I did when I was a baby. Other people are going to feel like I did when I was a baby. It's not comfortable. I don't want to feel that way. I don't want them to feel that way. So bring down that sensation. Just feel the raw sensation of it as it is, that fear, that sadness, without any label now, and just feeling the sensation. You feel all of the spaciousness around it and see that now that little bundle of sensation does not lead to the necessity of another belief or another um, story about it, right?
before we get
Yeah,
too
yeah,
far from it,
yeah.
for the sake of other people, how do we
Yeah.
get to the spaciousness?
So you basically want to feel the edges of wherever that sensation is. So you feel the fear or the sadness or whatever else is there, and feel the kind of the biggest density of that sensation, just however it shows up in the physical sense field. So again, if images come up around it, we let them be. If stories of verbalization come up around it, we let that be. We want to just come to the raw physical sensation of what we take to be the emotion. Let those labels of whatever it is go. Feel just the density of that sensation wherever it's showing up. If it's in one place, it's in one place. If it's in two, three, or four places, just notice those pockets of density, the pockets of sensation, and then feel the outer boundaries of that, because it's not going to be the totality of your experience. There is like a perspective where we're kind of looking down or sensing down at these bundles of sensation, right? And so then we feel the outer edges of those sensations. If they're round, if they're weirdly shaped, however they show up, we just notice the outer edge of them and see if we can feel parts of the experience that are not them. And if you have a hard time uh, kind of feeling spaciousness in the body, or in this space that's around the body, or that the body seems to be appearing in, it can be useful to um, feel other parts of the body that aren't that. So in other words, if your sense of fear is happening where you have sensation like in the chest and the belly, for instance, hold those in your awareness. You're focusing on those sensations, but then also focus on what it feels like in your left leg, in your right leg, in your left arm, in your right arm, and maybe even around the head, particularly the back of the head, the back of the body. Finding these spaces where there's something that feels either neutral or possibly even pleasant. And it starts to put us into that perspective where we still have sensation in the chest or the belly, but now I can also feel this neutrality that's around it. I can feel these other parts of the body that aren't connected to that, that aren't infiltrated by that feeling of fear or sadness. Feel your ears, feel your toes, your feet. Find anything that feels neutral or positive. And then see if you can start to expand out past the boundaries of the skin. So if you try to feel the physical boundaries of the arms and the legs and the torso, feel the skin and where the air seems to come in contact with the skin. And see if you can actually feel that boundary. Can you feel what skin is really felt like? Or is there just patches appearing of tingling, of coolness, of warmth, of tickling, of pressure? And can you see that those don't actually delineate the boundary between anything? You
Right.
can't tell where that pressure really is happening, right? There's just a feeling of pressure. And even if you're feeling where your butt is on the chair, or your back is on the back of the chair, or your hands are on your legs, something that feels like a very distinct boundary, if you focus the attention just on that feeling of pressure, even that starts to dissolve. It starts to vibrate and become more and more nebulous. It's less and less solid. So then you can start to feel beyond this boundary of sensation. So wherever you thought the skin was, you might notice that you're seeing a mental image of the outline of a body or a shape of a body, but that mental image has absolutely no connection to the sensations that you're feeling. It's just a trick of the mind putting in a mental image that's trying to create a map to hold all of this sensation into one easily understood net. So you let that be or let it go. Come back to the felt sensations, and you feel the sensation of the boundaries of wherever you thought the skin was, wherever you feel that movement, coolness, pressure, tingling, and see if you can, without forcing it, with a feeling of relaxation, relax and see if you can feel how far past where your initial thoughts of the boundaries of the body are. can you start to feel? In other words, if it felt like the skin of your left arm was in one particular location, put a lot of attention on that supposed boundary of the skin of your arm. And as that boundary starts to dissolve, see how far into the space you can still feel. It doesn't really connect to your mental image of an arm anymore. It kind of becomes almost like if you have a watercolor painting of an arm and then you pour water on it and the paint just
Mhm.
starts to run and thin out and get more and more um, diffuse into the space around it. You can't really tell. And we can start to play with that all around the body so that any place that felt like it was a boundary just becomes this dissolving watercolor opening of a sensation into space. And the more we get used to feeling that, again, we can still go back to if you have a feeling of fear or sadness or anger or anything else that's just uncomfortable rising in the body, you can feel those sensations, but then also notice all of this diffuse spaciousness that is holding them. They're just appearing in this absolute openness. And there's no reason to put more attention on the sensations that we associate with fear or sadness than there is on all of this wide open spaciousness. And it really helps to remove the label of fear or sadness so that we're just dealing with the raw sensory experience of it, the raw sensations in the body. And that allows everything to be with the kind of equanimity that we don't have when we're putting a story or a label on it. And then you can see when we don't have a story or a label on it, that those sensations in the body, or sensations just floating in space now, have no actual connection to anything else. This feeling of a moral imperative to be kind to other people or to not cause suffering to others. We can see that the sensations that arise in response to that are just conditioned arisings. They don't actually connect to a thought at all in that way that we once thought they did. There might seem to be a co-arising where they effectively come up together or one creates the other in a little feedback loop. But when we break it down to what is really here right now, we can feel that it is just sensation and that that sensation has no meaning or connection beyond itself. And what we're really doing, I think, while we're doing this is reprogramming our conditioned system. We're reprogramming the brain to detach from the story and the label and the beliefs about these things. And it basically changes the way that the brain functions. So we're no longer immediately reactive when these things appear. And then we no longer feel that personal identification bound up in those stories and labels that come up. And it's kind of this slow and gradual way of doing it, but we are rewiring things so that the experience is more and more equanimous every time you encounter a situation that used to spark one of these feelings of immediate reactivity or immediate identification with being the victim or the powerless one or feeling fearful or scared or sad. It's shifting that whole experience to something that is much more open, detached, and equanimous. Um, so with this also as a framework, then you can take perhaps a different belief that you feel right now, something that you know to be true or believe to be true.
Okay.
And do you have one?
Hmm.
Do you want to say what it is?
Yeah, sure. That Tuesday should not uh, be so mean to her mom.
Mm, good. So again, these are ones that you keep bringing up that I think have emotional responses connected to them too, though. It might be easier to do this in a clean way with something which has less
Okay.
emotional connection to start with.
Let's see. What are some examples?
Well, like I had said before about, like the belief
Ah,
that
yeah,
you know
like
where you were
family.
born, you know,
Okay.
do you feel like you know where you were born and on you know, which day and uh,
I'm going to pick the house I grew up in.
okay, good. So there's a feeling that you know the house that you grew up in,
Hmm.
right? So what happens when you think that thought that I believe that I grew up in this particular house? Do you see an image of the house?
Yeah.
What makes you feel like that is um, a true statement that you grew up in that house? Don't allow the images in the mind to sway you because those images could be from a movie that you watched. Right? There's no way to verify in your mind, sitting here right now, that every memory that you have that pops up to reinforce that isn't some false memory or, again, something that you watched on TV and really identified with and really wish that you lived in this house or, it was very impactful in some way.
Well, then we run into a problem because I can't.
Exactly. So without that, see, before we actually, let me backtrack a little bit. So before we break down the fact that you can't know what any of those images are, I want you to feel what it feels like to know that that is true.
Okay. Let's see.
Again, the images aren't telling you that it's true. And
Yeah, but there's this feeling in the body, but I could not tell you for the life of me what that feeling is.
where do you have a sense of where it is?
Hang on, let me see if I can. Yeah, it's once again this region right here.
Hmm. Is it like a vibrating, a fluttering, a buzzing, something else, contraction? How would you describe it?
Hmm. Not quite a contraction. I mean, it's kind of it. It's more like it's just a density.
Hmm. So how do you know that that density relate is that density is proof of the truth of the thought that I grew up in that house?
I don't.
Good. So feel into that density. Can you find any meaning or any solidity even to that density? Like fully absorb into the sensation of it.
Hmm.
Without the image of a house or the verbalization that I grew up in that house, how would you know that this sensation meant anything at all?
I wouldn't because it's all dependent on something else.
Hmm. So
You
can
know,
you?
the mental picture or a thought, an idea, a memory. It requires one or more of those in order to feel like it actually substantiates that idea.
Good. So feel the sensation, and just as a test, try to pop. pop up an image of like the house from Full House, or some other, the Golden
Mm,
Girls, some other house that you've seen on TV,
okay.
and hold that sensation as it's been, and then hold that other image in mind. Does the sensation change, or is it still just the same sensation with a new image in place?
It's just the same sensation with a new image in place. It doesn't have a sense of connection.
Good. So we can kind of play with this to convince ourselves that there is no relationship between the two.
Right.
Because they show up at first doesn't mean that they are trustworthy. That the
Mm.
sensation in the body that is that kind of vague whatever is really meaning anything. Um, and then this is the thing that I point to that is never sure exactly how to describe it, but it's kind of like if you just absorb into the sensation itself and let it fully be itself without having any additional belief attached to it that it means anything more than it does. Can you then run that idea in mind that I was born in that house and hear the words of it, see whatever image shows up, and feel that sensation, but effectively have it decouple, that they detach from creating that level of meaning that they once had, that level of feeling true. It's like all of a sudden it just becomes apparent that there is an image floating in space of a random house. There is a sentence that says, I was born there, like some David Lynch voice that just points to something inexplicable. And the sensation in the body that is there regardless of whether it's the house I think I was brought up in, or the Golden Girls house, or some other TV home. And holding those kind of separate as their own unique experiences all happening in the same space, does that seem to decouple the the ability to believe in that thing, or to diffuse that?
When you say decouple, you mean that that physical sensation in the body no longer um, functions as some sort of evidence for the
Yeah,
idea that I grew up in that house.
exactly. It's its own
Okay,
sensation that has no it's not an arbiter of the veracity of
I
the
see. Mm.
because it's something that you can transpose over anything and it'll still remain the same.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, it's possible it could go deeper, but it definitely um, makes it clear that. Hang on a minute. Hold on a minute. I may have
Yeah.
spoken too soon. Hang on. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's possible to disconnect those two things.
Mm, good.
You got to. It's one of those things you got to be careful because there. It seems like there are varying levels of that coupling or connecting the two things. You know, there's the real obvious first one you see, and then well, look out because there are more subtle
Yeah.
versions of it underneath.
Yeah.
But okay, yeah,
Yeah. So the more you practice that kind of decoupling, that pulling apart of these things and just holding them separately without that binding association happening, it's where I think from what I've found is that the more you practice doing it, the quicker the experience is to where You can have
Mm.
just a random belief about something, a news story pops up and there's a belief that it's a certain way. And then you can do this really quick checking in, and it's like all the parts just kind of separate, and then you're just left with that openness again. So it's that really quick shift that just unlocks that belief every time.
Well, here's something interesting that happened in that process.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that was where there was a feeling of intention or seeking it out associated with it. That I've been walking around for weeks and weeks now, and anytime that there's something that happens that gives rise to a sense of someone here,
Yeah.
um, someone who is having this experience, someone who's present here, something might happen like, Susanna might ask me if I took care of something that I said I was going to take care of. And I realized, oh, I haven't. And there's this, dang it, I forgot it. And she was counting on me to do it. And then so immediately the question is, okay, what is creating a sense of self here? Who is here? How is there someone present in this? And it's been bugging me for the longest time because I could not figure out what it is. Like, okay, so sometimes it seems like there's this really, really quick mental image of some kind, not even of anything in particular, something that's totally abstract that just comes and gone in a millisecond. And there's the bodily sensation, and taking an inventory of all things that are present. It's like there's still something there. There is still something there that is not being seen. And now I know what it is. It's the same thing. Like it's the same thing. It might be a different feeling, but it's the same basic bodily sensation that was there to reinforce the idea of this is the house I grew up in. There
Mm,
is a physical sensation, and it's not just the basic somatic sense of having a body of all of
yeah.
the
Yeah.
metabolism and energy and heat and all of that
Yeah.
the body generates. It's these, it's like the contraction or the density, or it's something of that sort.
Yeah.
It's along those lines, and it comes up instantaneously. It's there very quickly, and then it's gone in pretty short order. And it goes along with those other things that I've been able to inventory.
Yeah.
But
Amazing.
but it was completely overlooked. And that seems like that's actually the foundation. That seems
Yeah.
like that's the underpinning for the sense of vision, hearing, seeing, um, motion,
Yeah.
anything else, the face mask, all of those things that contribute to it, they're all built on this physical sensation that might be a contraction, might be some sort of density or something that is not easily described. That is sort of that's the foundation. That's the primary underpinning that everything else is built on. That says, oh, there's someone here. This is I. This is me.
Yeah.
And it was really great to see that, because in that moment of seeing that, it's like the whole um, charade of someone just took another major hit.
Wonderful. That's amazing. Yes.
Yeah, that was really cool. I'm
Really,
really
really
glad
neat.
for that, because that question has been evading me
Uh,
for weeks and weeks. I mean, it's been going on for a while. And now I finally
uh,
got the answer. And so when that comes up and I do that inquiry in the moment, I can see, oh, there's also that bodily sensation that goes with it too.
exactly. It's such an important part. That vague somatic sense, however we quantify it, is it's so pervasive, and it is so um personalizing. It's what I always say, like with a thought, it's the sort of thing that makes the thought feel real and personal and important.
Mhm.
It's the same thing with our emotions and all that. There is that thing that is there all the time. And it's crazy because the sensation can be there, and it's that added association that makes that sensation mean that this thought is true, or that I am here, that there's a
And it's
belief. And it's like, yeah,
and it's completely ridiculous, because all it is just a contraction or a tingling or a buzzing, or like
yeah,
the one I use, because that's the only way I can describe it, kind of a density, and that's all it is. And it's like, it's just as absurd as saying, or it's just as absurd as assuming that because I think something, it makes it true.
Exactly.
I mean, how could that possibly be evidence of anything? The only thing it's evidence of is itself.
Exactly. Exactly. I think it's related. We were watching the past couple nights. This somebody, I forget who it originally was, had started passing around an old video by Todd Murphy, who I had never heard of before. Do you remember the God helmet? It was
Oh, the one by what's his name, Persinger?
yeah, exactly. This guy, Todd Murphy, has worked with Persinger for decades, and he actually created his own, like a version of the God helmet that you can buy. It's the Shiva something. Uh,
Hmm.
and there's a series of lectures that he gave that are pretty interesting on
Mm.
um, the first one was on like the sense of self and enlightenment and how it's created by the brain. And it was super interesting. But then he was talking about like psychic phenomena like remote viewing and telepathy and things like that, and
Mm.
again how it relates to the brain. Um, but the interesting thing was he was talking about the binding process where
Thinking process.
yeah, the brain has a binding factor where it's a process where it's basically tying all of the senses together and making
Ah,
uh,
okay.
and what's interesting is like he talked about the thalamus is where I guess all of the independent sensory phenomena are just kind of coming in and being aggregated. And there's this binding pattern that happens in the brain that goes from the bottom of sort of bottom inside lower part of the brain forward, up and over and back. And
Huh.
it basically aggregates everything 24 or 25 times per second.
Whoa.
It's creating this all the time. And the way that the Shiva helmet works that he does is because the flow of pattern goes this direction, there's a sequence of magnetic coils that go around the brain, and basically it's timed roughly to sync with that movement. But when it comes this way, it's following with the movement, and when it comes this way, it's going against the grain of the movement. And
Ah,
basically all of the stuff that is well, very simplified, the parts of the brain that have to do with relaxation and opening up to these kind of other states of consciousness and all of that are happening on the right side of the brain. So it's basically doing that to decouple or to interfere with that binding process in the right side of the brain to change the way that it functions. And so that's effectively, I guess, the short, simplified version of what it's doing. Um, but it's interesting because that's I think part of that experience that we have of having a sensation in the body and assuming that that relates to an image that I have and the story that that image is where I grew up. That's something which is happening subconsciously. It's part of the brain process for creating this sense of binding. And effectively, what I think we're doing with all of this is breaking apart that. And I don't know exactly how the conscious application of inquiry is affecting these things, but it certainly seems to. Uh,
well, I mean, and this won't speak to the specifics, but um, if we think of the brain as an organic computer, the primary software and coding is the language that we use. I
yeah,
mean, imagery is in there too, and I don't know where that rates, but obviously the language that we use, spoken, thought, and written, has something to do with that. And then
yeah,
um, the 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 way that we can use language to encapsulate shifts in perspective. How it's not this, it's this. And tying those two together, it, it's not really terribly surprising that you can undo other things that were, by and large, not entirely, but by to a large degree, created in the same fashion.
absolutely. Yeah. One thing he talked about a lot, which makes a lot of sense, is that the left hippocampus is involved with our speech activation, our creation of speech, and the way that he describes it is effectively that we have two senses of self. There's like a sense of self
Hmm.
in the left hemisphere and a sense of self in the right hemisphere. And the left hemisphere sense of self is actually the one that's created by speech, by thought, by verbal thought.
Hmm.
And so we're effectively speaking that self into existence. And that's why all of the meditations that people do where you are slowing down thoughts, slowing down the self-thinking, and even doing like mantras and stuff like that, even though it's using the speech center, it's basically stopping the self-related speech that's creating the self, that's creating that sense of self. It's just repeating a nonsense sound over and over and over again in order to basically not have it be creating that sense of self from there. The
Right.
self on the right is a non-verbal, more amorphous one, which is the one that when we feel like we're having an out-of-body experience, or when it's the one that the God helmet triggers when you have that feeling of like a presence in the room of a god or a demon or an angel or somebody behind me that I can't see. That's that sense of self from the right hemisphere being projected outward into the external environment, which I think is probably also when people have like sixth fetter experiences of I am that tree looking back at me and feeling like I am, everything there. I think it's that right hemisphere sense of self that's being projected out onto the environment around us.
Hmm.
Um,
It's interesting how that organ can
yeah,
do so much.
it does everything. I mean,
Yeah.
literally everything. As we take the world to be, it is making it. And it's fascinating how its limitations create so much of the
Hmm.
the unique hallmark of the world as we experience it. We only see it a certain way because we have a limitation in our receptors and the way that it cobbles together all of this information. We would have a completely different world if the brain was, you know, slightly different in any way. And like I just saw a little thing about I think it was what was it? Not brine shrimp. I don't think it's a not there's a type of shrimp. What's it called? It apparently has like the fastest strike of any animal on Earth, and it creates underwater like a little sonic pulse that is able to stun prey by the force of the like shock wave that's created under the water by its strike. But this little shrimp has such a massive range of vision because it has I forget if we have like six receptors or something color wise I forget it has like 16, so it can see ultraviolet and it can see band wavelengths of light that are way out of our perceptual view. So this little shrimp has this completely different experience of the world than anything we can imagine. um, and it, moves insanely fast and has like, it's just this like literally superhuman kind of creature that's a little tiny shrimp that lives under the water. And but everything we think is one way is really just a fabrication based on this little perceptual organ, and it's the way that it's fabricating everything. So I think we're just starting to understand a little bit of how the illusion is created and finding ways of disrupting it in fun and interesting, insightful ways. Um, but we have a long way to go, obviously.
Well, and well, two things. um, One, it kills me that um, if more people were aware of this, that we probably would have far less of the problems we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I wanted to mention was as you were describing all of that, it makes me think of something that Susanna said to me last night. We were talking about these kinds of things. She was kind of telling me about her work with her LU guide,
Yeah.
and so she was telling me about the inquiry she's doing and the experiences she's been having. And she said, at one point, she said, "What's spiritual about this?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing.
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 It's just a way we've chosen to apply language to it to
Yeah.
make it something we can understand and talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that's disappointing to a lot of people, but sorry.
I know. I know. And I think that's, Pernell and I have talked about that I think one of the thing that is maybe disappointing about our approach to this that I think doesn't resonate with everybody because a lot of people
Mm,
do come to the spiritual space in a way where they really love the idea of what metaphysical spirituality gives us. That mythology that's behind it, the idea that I am literally one with everything and that there is this greater consciousness and there is this, all of the wonderful, beautiful ideas that we have that have become either religions or philosophies or other things. They're I understand the draw to it, and it can feel really warm and comforting and beautiful, and I get that. Um, And I think there are a lot of spiritual teachers that talk into that. There's they kind of lead with that as the sort of carrot that draws you towards
mm,
that goal. You're going to have this beautiful, incredible, blissful experience, which is going to be your true nature. And, it's to find your true self and the way you really are, and that there's really no death and there's really no and it sounds really beautiful when you put it in this kind of philosophical religious language. We tend to be a bit more pragmatic with it and more like, as far as we know, we can't say that any of those things are true. Also can't say that any of them are not true. It
right.
really brings you down to that. But we use enough of the kind of science of today to help explain why things are the way they are. I mean, the retreat that we have coming up in March, Pernilla is doing a lot of work on that because it's tying in a lot of the her training in um, like development and how the different stages in development lead to the conditioning of how we show up as adults. And so there's nothing like, mystical or magical or metaphysical or personal about the fact that one person has grown up to be this like passive aggressive type who, has to guilt people into doing things for them, and another one becomes this absolute bully who just, you know, forces people to do everything to get their way, and then, somebody else who's a complete doormat, and just wants everybody to like them and to get along. And like we have this idea that there's like a real person in there who is making, who's made all the choices to become this raging narcissist or to become this really kind, saintly person. And basically it's just like, causes and conditions down to, how your parents were at this point in your life, or what the nutrition of your mother was when you were in the womb, or, something else. And it's like it all factors in a way that really takes the personality out of it or the personhood out of it. And it doesn't really leave room for a lot of the a need for the mystical or the kind of magical or spiritual stuff to be there. Um, but again, and that's why like for the eighth feder material that Pernilla made, especially, she has so many caveats before the eighth feder stuff about like only do this when you are drawn to it, when you are ready, because it's about seeing through all of those concepts and all of the beliefs about whether there is a God or not, or whether there is ever-present consciousness, or everything is love and I am one with everything, or whatever the belief is. It's like seeing through the inherent truth or the ability to even know if any of that is actually true.
Mm,
And in your direct experience, none of that can exist. So yeah, it's a way of dealing with something that used to be purely from this spiritual, faith-based connotation and kind of coming at it from a very different perspective. The interesting thing being, I haven't actually read it, but I saw Todd Murphy's book, which is about how the brain creates consciousness and, or well, I don't know consciousness. I actually haven't watched the stuff on his take on that yet, but all of the different spiritual phenomena and, enlightenment and all of that stuff. His book was actually, the foreword was written by the Dalai Lama. So
Yeah.
it's really like that, crossing that threshold. And I had heard the Dalai Lama years ago had said that if somebody had asked him if there was a pill to create enlightenment, would you take it? And he said, yes, of course. So there's an interesting bridge being made between the scientific and the conventionally spiritual that we'll see. I mean, I do have a feeling that the conventionally spiritual is going to be less and less relevant to people the more they do this stuff. But, it also has a place. I mean, Jung was pretty adamant that mythology is a necessary part of a human psyche.
Hmm.
So,
Well, um, you know, it may just be the way I see things, but it seems like everything I've read or heard from Zen Buddhism and from Theravada, especially Theravada Buddhism, but Zen is pretty closely along the line with it, that um, it's pretty non-romantic stuff. I mean, it's very much like this. It's very much, you know, tossing all that stuff overboard.
yeah.
And, you could accuse it, especially the Theravadins, of, in a way, kind of being, it's not exactly the right word, especially with what it applies to today, but you could kind of say they were materialists of a
Mm.
sort.
Yeah.
Um, not quite like materialist, where you get these scientists who say we understand everything and this is it and this is all there is,
Yeah.
because they've actually, as far as I can tell, they have failed to go deep enough.
Yeah.
And of course, there's still the issue of the fact that they think there's someone there, whoever that is,
Yeah.
even if it's only the atheistic idea of, well, there's someone here now, and of course, when I die, they stop. Well, no, there's not anyone there between death and birth either. Sorry,
Exactly. Exactly.
but uh, so some people hearing this, um, I would hope it wouldn't be too much of a disappointment or a letdown, because if they've come through Zen and Theravada Buddhism, it shouldn't be too far a stretch. And
Yeah.
a lot of those things like compassion and loving kindness and those sorts of things. Um, it seems like if somebody really does the work, they don't need some sort of framework to create that or to
Yeah.
give it validity, because it comes up on its own. There's something about walking this way. Like the first one that hit me, I've mentioned this before. The first one that hit me was the need for honesty. And that's become really paramount for me, where I get to the point of, um, as silly as it sounds, somebody sent me something in the mail for a product that I bought and wants me to leave a 5-star review so that they can give me, credit on Amazon. And, it's just been sitting on the counter because I look at it and I go, something doesn't feel right about this, because I thought, well, I'll game the whole system. I'll give them their review. And then after a few days, after I've gotten the credit, I'll just pull the review. I'm like,
Right.
no, that
Right.
doesn't feel right
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
So it's just been sitting there, and I think it's just waiting for some part of the system to go, let's just forget about the whole thing, tear it up, toss it in the bin,
Yeah.
and move on.
Yeah.
Um, that arose naturally, just like, um, I've heard Pernilla talk about it in some of her videos about how, kindness and compassion, that those are the only responses,
Yeah.
and that seems to once again arise very naturally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, well, I don't know. I think they're much more common throughout the animal world than we give them credit for. That
What is?
kindness and
Oh yeah,
compassionate
absolutely.
action.
I see it all the time with the dogs.
Yeah, of course, of course. I love Instagram for that reason, alone. It's just seeing videos of like animals doing altruistic and kind and loving things to other animals of other species,
Mhm.
and things like
Yeah.
that, where it's like, I think it is our base nature when we aren't completely deluded in selfish, self-referential thinking and striving. Um,
Yeah.
and you don't need like some external morality forcing that upon people. I think that only works as far as the people are going against their own nature to begin with, and then being sort of forced back into reconciliation with, what was there to begin with, just because they're so not in touch with, um, what it's like to not live a completely self-delusional life. Um,
Well, I wanted to ask you about something.
yeah,
We talked about it by email.
yeah, I was actually just thinking we didn't touch on that, but please.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about it because you're right. It was, and I felt it when I was typing all that out. The inability to adequately capture all of that in a written message. But let's see if I can describe this. Okay.